Good morning. It's always good to hear the kids singing and the live music. I'm glad we can get that done. I talk a little quieter than they do, so I'm going to move forward a little bit. This morning, I want to talk about the I am statements that Jesus made. Now, they're all in the Gospel of John. There are 7 metaphorical statements, that is, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, right? He's not bread or light, but he's metaphorically those things. Then there's 2 of them that actually aren't metaphorical that we'll talk about at the end of the sermon. A couple of these we have gone over during our series, so I won't go into too much depth about them because we already have, but I will mention some important things to look at. With that, I want to go ahead and take a look at John chapter 6, verse 35, which I believe we looked at last time, or not too awful long ago. John 6:35, which says, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. So again, we looked at this recently. If you remember, Jesus had just fed the 5,000 men, plus women and children, as Matthew tells us. And he talked about the manna that came down from heaven, which Nick mentioned. That manna came down for the 40 years of wandering, and it gave life to Israel, right? It kept them fed, gave them sustenance. But Jesus, well, he's the better bread from heaven, as we talked about before. He's the true bread from heaven. Also, during the temptation of Jesus, just after his baptism, and he was out in the wilderness, he quoted Deuteronomy 8:3 to the adversary, which says, man does not live by bread alone, but by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Jesus is proving yet again that he is from God. What normally comes from a mouth? Well, typically it's words, is it not? Jesus, as we saw in John 1, he is the Word. So again, he's proceeding from the Father. We survive on him, not on what we put into our mouths. In Genesis 3, when God curses humanity and the rest of creation, God tells Adam that he will eat bread by the sweat of his brow. That is, he will work for his food. Do we work for the bread of Christ? No. If we worked for the bread of Christ, then we would be saved by our works. But instead, we are saved by his works, not ours. There's something that was put in the tabernacle and later in the temple called the bread of the presence, or sometimes it's called the showbread or the shoe bread, depending on which translation you're using. It's first mentioned in Exodus 25, but I want to take a look at Leviticus 24, verses 5 through 9. So if you'll turn to that passage with me. Leviticus 24, verses 5 through 9. Then you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. And you shall set them in 2 rows, 6 to a row, on the pure gold table before Yahweh. And you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be a memorial portion for the bread, even an offering by fire to Yahweh. Every Sabbath day he shall set it in order before Yahweh continually. It is an everlasting covenant for the sons of Israel. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place. For it is most holy to him from the offerings to Yahweh by fire, his portion forever. Now, 2/10 of an ephah, we don't use ephahs today, that comes out to about 1 pound of flour in each cake. So those are pretty big loaves. I talked to my mom a little bit because she makes a lot of banana bread and whatnot, and she said a pound for her flour that she uses makes about 3 normal-sized loaves. So these are pretty big loaves then. This bread, while in a way is a sacrifice to Yahweh, it's also a gift to Aaron and his sons so that they actually have some food to eat. Aaron being the first high priest and his sons, of course, being the high priests after him, was something that they could eat on throughout the week until it got replaced. And only they were supposed to eat it, though David did eat it once, but we can talk about that at another time. Jesus, of course, he is the bread of the presence, in a sense, because he's the bread of life, and he's here present with the disciples and Of course, the Spirit is present with us right now, but he provides for us far more than food. He does sustain our life, as we talked about recently, but he also provides eternal life, right? As opposed to eternal death, which is what those who don't believe receive. I want to go ahead and look at the next I am statement back in John, which, by the way, I forgot to mention. You could put a bookmark in John because we'll be going back to it quite often. And we'll be going in chronological order, at least for the first 7 I am statements. John chapter 8, verse 12 is our next statement. And if I go a little fast, feel free to come up and ask me questions. I'm happy to talk about them. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I am the light of the world. At the beginning of our series, we saw that Jesus, as the Word, was the light of the world, the light that comes into the world, shines into the darkness, and of course the darkness flees from it. Of course, the Apostle John was writing that. These are the words of Jesus here. The first words that God spoke, at least that we have written down for us back in Genesis, were, let there be light. And there was light, and he saw that it was good. In Exodus, after the Pharaoh finally relented and said, fine, get out of here, go, you're a nuisance now, God guides Israel through the wilderness to the Red Sea and then to Mount Sinai and then for the 40 years. He guides them in the shape of a pillar of cloud and fire. Cloud by day because they can see that better, and then fire, light by night because they can see that better at night. And he's lighting their way. I've got a few passages here I'm going to quote and read, but you don't need to turn to them if you don't want to. Psalm 119, 105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Proverbs 4:18 says, but the path of the righteous is like a light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the fullness of day. Isaiah 42, 6 through 7 says, I am Yahweh, I have called you in righteousness. I also take hold of you by the hand and guard you, and I will give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, and those who inhabit darkness from the prison. Jesus as the light of the world is all of these things, and the Isaiah passage is a messianic passage. That's God talking to the Messiah. So when he says, I have called you, and I'm going to give you, that's the Messiah. So we see light being an important part of the biblical text. It's an important part of John, light and dark, going back and forth. It's something that God desires for his people. It's something that is good for his people, and something that guides us as we go along the way of life, the way towards God. Getting back to John for our statements, the next one is in John chapter 10, 1 through 9, and the one after that is actually immediately in it in John 10, but we'll read that here in a second. I'm reading a larger section because it's important, because these two are kind of connected to each other. So John 10, 1 through 9. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he brings all his own out, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. A stranger they will never follow, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. So Jesus said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. And all who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. I am the door, specifically the door of the sheep. Here, of course, we see that a door or gate is meant to be the correct way to get into the sheep, right? And to lead them out of the sheep pen. He talked about the sheep know his voice and they don't know a stranger's voice, something I've heard. I can't substantiate it, but when I was in Jordan, I would hear about how the shepherds would bring their flocks together into one pen because it was easier to protect, and you had more shepherds there to protect things. And when they would call them out, well, each shepherd had their own little whistle of some kind, and their sheep would hear that whistle and go, and the other sheep wouldn't because it wasn't their whistle. And then the next guy would whistle, and his sheep would go. And they had them marked, too, I think, through various means. The wool, they could dye or paint or something, and so they could tell, yeah, those are all my sheep. So it's pretty interesting that sheep actually do know their own master's voice. Getting back to doors and gates, though. Gates are important places in the ancient Near East, and in other countries, too, I'm sure, but I've studied the ancient Near East, so I know a little bit more about it there. They're not only meant to shut in a city and so keep people in or out and protect those who are in from bad people, but they're also places of meeting and of business and legal type proceedings. We can see in the Old Testament various things going on with a legal proceeding taking place at the gate with the elders of the city. Not too long ago, we looked at the broad and narrow ways. And I want to put forward to you that Jesus is the narrow gate that leads to the narrow way, right? If we can put these together. Of course, anyone who's trying to get in other ways, they're not doing it right, which will be important as we talk about one of the other sayings a little later on. If we continue here in John 10, I want to read verses 10 through 17 now. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches and scatters them, because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep which are not from this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. Now, before I get to the good shepherd, the other sheep of the other fold, he was sent to the Jews, and so the other sheep are the Gentiles, right? The other fold, and he has other sheep in there to bring out, in case someone tries to confuse you with that. But getting back to the good shepherd, shepherds and flocks were important in Israel. Abraham was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. Of course, Joseph and then before Moses. David was a shepherd before he became king. So they know a lot about this. The shepherd is the guy who owns the flock. Right? Hence why Jesus talks about these hired hands not doing a very good job, that they don't own the flock, they're just getting a paycheck. They don't care about the flock. They can find another job, maybe, perhaps. Not as a shepherd if they ran away, obviously. At least I wouldn't hire them. Israel's leaders in the Old Testament are also called shepherds. So I want to take a look at some Old Testament passages for this. First is Ezekiel 34, verses 11 to 16. Too far. The one problem with Bible pages, they're so thin, but they have to be, otherwise your book is a lethal weapon. No. Ezekiel 34, 11 to 16. For thus says Lord Yahweh, behold, I myself will seek my sheep and care for them, as a shepherd cares for his herd in the day when he is among his sheep, which are spread out. So I will care for my sheep, and will deliver them from all the places to which they were scattered on a cloudy and gloomy day. I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and bring them to their own land, and I will shepherd them on the mountains of Israel, by the streams and in all the inhabited places of the land. I will shepherd them in a good pasture, and their grazing around will be on the mountain heights of Israel. There they will lie down on good grazing ground and be shepherded in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I will shepherd my flock, and I will make them lie down, declares the Lord Yahweh. I will search for the lost and bring back the scattered, bind up the broken and strengthen the sick. But the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd them with judgment. So Yahweh here, he's saying he's going to shepherd the flock himself. Well, is that not what Jesus was saying? I am the good shepherd. And of course, those of us who know his word, who take the time to study it, to learn it, to pray, to fellowship with others, as we talked about before, he does shepherd us. Now, the first 10 verses of Ezekiel 34, Yahweh is railing against the shepherds of the leaders of Israel, because they're being bad shepherds. That's what Jesus was talking about, the hired hands being bad shepherds. I try to consider myself more of a sheepdog than a hired hand, because a sheepdog is loyal to their master. They watch over the flocks appropriately, especially when trained well. At the same time, of course, I'm a human being, not a dog, and I do make mistakes, but hopefully I'm not a hired hand in the sense that he was saying it. If we look now at Jeremiah 23, verses 1 through 4, for that one, we can get a little bit more detail actually about the people he will choose. If I can get to the right place. Jeremiah 23, 1 through 4. Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares Yahweh. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who are shepherding my people, you have scattered my flock and banished them, and have not attended to them. Behold, I am about to attend to you for the evil of your deeds, declares Yahweh. Then I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the land where I have banished them, and cause them to return to their pasture, and they will be fruitful and multiply. I will also raise up shepherds over them, and they will shepherd them, and they will not be afraid any longer, nor be terrified, nor will any be left unattended, declares Yahweh. I think Jeremiah here is kind of condensing that larger section of Ezekiel. But again, we have Yahweh railing against the shepherds, the leaders of Israel, for not taking care of his people. And again, he says he will go and find his people, and he will attend to them. He will be the shepherd that the flock needs. He takes responsibility and leadership very seriously, which is why those of us who lead and teach get a harsher judgment. Because if we mislead people, that's on us. It's still kind of on them. They should be learning and paying attention, right? But it's more on us for being shrewd enough to convince them the wrong thing, right? Jesus, in calling himself the Good Shepherd, I think is making a statement. I am God. It's not direct. But who else could, if he's not God, who else could possibly say, I'm the Good Shepherd? And be saying it truly, as opposed to falsely. I don't think anyone could. Of course, we have Psalm 23. Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right? We saw in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah that God will tend to his flock. There are plenty of other Old Testament passages, some in Genesis and all over the place, that say that someone is saying, God is my shepherd. God has shepherded me. He's led me around. And of course, Jesus is indeed God, as he claimed to be. There's no doubt of that. Continuing on in John, this time John 11, verses 25 to 26, for our next I am statement. And we looked at this one before also. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, ever. Do you believe this? This is in the context of him raising Lazarus from the dead, which we again talked about a few weeks ago. In Revelation, we see that Jesus holds the keys of death and Hades. Right? He controls death and Hades because he has the keys. If I have the key to the car, I can decide whether it turns on and goes somewhere or not. And I would say there's only one set of keys to death and Hades, not multiple. Also in Revelation, we see everyone being raised from the dead. Everyone. Now, I want to take a look again at Ezekiel, this time in chapter 37, verses 1 to 14. This is called the vision of the valley of dry bones. It's one of my favorite passages from the Old Testament. Ezekiel 37, 1 to 14. Now God is talking about Israel and bringing them back, but it's still important for us to read. It's a bigger section, so bear with me here. The hand of Yahweh was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of Yahweh, and caused me to rest in the middle of the valley, and it was full of bones. He caused me to pass among them all around, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. He said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Lord Yahweh, you know. Then he said to me, Prophesy over these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus says Lord Yahweh to these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, that you may come to life. And I will put sinews on you, make flesh come upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, that you may come alive. And you will know that I am Yahweh. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a rumbling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, sinews were on them, and flesh came up upon them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, Thus says Lord Yahweh, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these who were killed, that they may come to life. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them. And they came to life and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great military force. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, Our bones are dried up, and our hope has perished. We are completely cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, Thus says Lord Yahweh, Behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, when I have opened your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves, my people. And I will put my spirit within you, and you will come to life. And I will place you on your own land. Then you will know that I, Yahweh, have spoken and done it, declares Yahweh. Again, he's talking about bringing Israel back to the land, back to life in a way. Right? And this is a vision. But it is something God can do. He has done it. He will do it again. In Genesis 1 and 2, we see God bringing life into existence. In the creation accounts, he breathes into Adam the breath of life, or the spirit of life. The Hebrew word is the same word for breath, spirit, or wind. Presumably, he does the same for Eve, though we aren't explicitly told that. And of course, we have the saints who were raised at the resurrection of Christ, which we'll talk about in the coming weeks. And again, like I said in Revelation at the end, we see him raising the dead back to life. And so even if you've been, or a loved one or whoever has been cremated or has been dead long enough to turn to dust, he'll bring them back. He'll give them back their body, a glorified version of it, but still their body. I want to go back to John chapter 10 real quick and read verse 18. We read 10 through 17. 1 through 17 before. Yeah, John 10, 18. No one takes it away from me, his life that is, but from myself I lay it down. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. So this is part of the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. We talked about Jesus raising the dead before, but he doesn't just have the authority to raise the dead. And remember, he would say to the dead, get up. Right? Everyone else that we looked at in that sermon would pray to God, God, please bring this person back. And then they would come back. He doesn't just have that ability, though. He has the ability to raise himself from the dead. And I'll talk more about how God could die and that sort of a thing in the coming weeks. But for now, it's the physical body that dies, that stops functioning. It's not the spirit within the body. The spirit doesn't cease to exist or go into some sort of sleep or something along those lines. At least not for God. Spirit sleep is a whole different thing for humans. Can of worms. We'll get to it later. But he has the ability to let his body die and then re-enter it, reanimate it, and come back. Again, we'll talk about that more in the coming weeks. He still has this authority, by the way, to say to a body, get up, and it gets up. And being the resurrection and the life, he has the authority to tell his own body to get up. For our next I am statement, I want to look in John 14, 1 through 6, which I'm sure some of you probably know pretty well as well. He's talking to his disciples here. John 14, 1 through 6. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may also be. And you know the way where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How do we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I am the way, the truth, the life. Here again, he says he is the life. A lot of these have to do with life, actually, if you take the time to think about them. The repetition is very, very important. And please notice he's saying the way, the truth, the life. There are not multiple ways to God. Not all roads lead to heaven. They may have all led to Rome at one point, but they don't all lead to heaven now. Now people will get upset with that and say, oh, you're being exclusive. How dare you? Well, if that's what the word says, that's what I'm going to preach. And it's not just us being exclusive either. All the religions of the world, if you take a look at them, are exclusive. You believe the way we believe or else kind of a thing, right? Now it may be for Hinduism. If you don't believe in Hinduism, you'll come back as something worse, and then maybe you'll believe in Hinduism next time and you'll get something better. But it's still, you believe the way we want you to, or you're lost, you're worse off in some way. But if you think about it, there's only one truth. If I say 2 plus 2 equals, there's only one answer to that. It's 4. There are an infinite amount of wrong answers to that, quite literally. Infinite is hard to think about, but if you have a positive infinite and a negative infinite, then there's an infinite number of wrong answers to 2 plus 2. In the same way, there's only one God. The so-called gods of other religions, they don't match our God when we start to describe them. Right? The God of Islam is so transcendent, he can't even interact with this world. He sends angels and jinns and all sorts of things to interact with the world, whereas the God of the Bible, yes, he sends angels, but he also comes and interacts with the world himself. And there are other things we could talk about too, but then the sermon would be a couple hours long. Some will say, well, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, they're two different gods. The Old Testament, he's mean and angry, and in the New Testament, he's loving. I don't think they've read very carefully. I see more love in the Old Testament than I do anger and wrath. And I see actually a decent amount of wrath in the New Testament. Not more than love, but still there. In Revelation, Jesus is depicted as having a sword come out of his mouth. It's kind of scary. So they are indeed the same God. God also tells us through his word here that, well, there's a proper way to live, a proper way to interact with each other, a proper way to worship him. These other religions of the world, they may have some truth. Right? We're all made in the image of God. We've all got things that are pulling on our heartstrings saying, hey, we should be doing this or that. Right? The golden rule It's not universal, I would say, but a lot of people do follow it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But there are a lot of things that these other religions get wrong when compared to what God says about how to live and how to worship, right? They get the main things wrong, the important things, the salvific things, they get wrong. And again, Jesus did all the work of salvation. We do nothing. In all these other religious systems, you're earning a better go-around in the next life, be it heaven or reincarnation or whatever. In Christianity, you're not earning it. It's a gift from God for faith. Speaking of being able to do nothing, the seventh metaphorical I am statement is in John 15, chapter 1, which we looked at. Actually, that was the one we looked at last week, wasn't it? John 15, 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. I am the true vine. It's important to remember that Jesus, being the vine, gives us the ability, us the branches, the ability to bear fruit. And as we looked at last week, this fruit includes obedience and disciple making. The Old Testament uses the vine as a symbol for Israel. Paul wrote that not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. The true Israel are those who have followed Yahweh, regardless of their bloodline. I do believe God has a special place in his heart for the Israelites and a plan for them in the end, but outside of Christ, they won't be saved. Right? They won't be saved any differently than we are. Just to be clear on that. So he is the true vine. He gives us the nourishment. He gives us the ability to grow. So for the metaphorical statements, that's the seventh one. I now want to take a look at the other I am statements. These are not metaphorical. Starting in John chapter 8, verse 58. We have Jesus. We have Jesus talking to the religious leadership here. And they think he has a demon, and they're talking about their father Abraham, and Jesus says, well, if you knew my father, you would glorify me. Certain things like that. And then he says that Abraham saw his day, and they're like, well, you're not even 50 yet. How does he see your day? And Jesus says this. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. That's bad grammar, isn't it? There's a reason for it, though. Before Abraham was, I am. In this statement, Jesus is, in a roundabout way, using the divine name of himself. Not Yahweh, but I am. The name Yahweh does come from the same root word in Hebrew as the verb to be, to exist. And so the meaning of it, typically people understand it maybe like the God who is or he who is. There's another thing, this might be a little technical grammatically, but there's a causative form. And so it could also be the one who causes to be. And if you think about it, God created everything, so he caused everything to be, and he still causes everything to be. But he also has always been. He has not been caused to be, so he is the one who is and the one who causes to be. So the fact that it could be both, I think, is interesting. But I'm a bit of a ancient language nerd, so. At any rate, I want to take a look now at Exodus chapter 3 to look more at this I am thing. Exodus 3, verses 13 to 14. This is the burning bush narrative, which perhaps you know from previous readings. And we're about halfway through Genesis on Wednesday nights, so we'll get to Exodus next. So if you're wanting to come and learn about that, I encourage you to try and make it on Wednesdays. Exodus 3, 13 and 14. Then Moses said to God, behold, I'm about to come to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they will say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." Yahweh here calls himself I am. And because of this, the Jews understood I am to be a name and or title referring to Yahweh, their God. When Jesus used it in John 8:58, the Jews, they pick up stones to stone him because they believed that he was being blasphemous. He wasn't, but they thought he was, because he was basically saying, I'm God. I was before Abraham. The last one I want to take a look at, it's in John 18, verses 4 through 6. And this is at the Garden of Gethsemane. The temple guard have come to get Jesus and arrest him. And we'll talk about that scene here in a couple of weeks, or a few weeks. But I want to look at these specific verses, John 18, 4 through 6. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Who do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he," or I am is the Greek. And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. As I said, the Greek here is I am. Technically, I am he is a proper translation. It's the Greek term ego eimi, if you find that interesting. The reason I'm mentioning it here is something in this statement caused these guards and Judas, apparently, to step back and fall backwards. Now, some people will say, well, it's just because he was so confident in his assertion, "Oh, that's me." And they're shocked that, we're guards and we're looking for you, and you just say it's you? Nobody does that, and they step backwards and fall. I don't think that's what's going on. If you think about it, when people in the Bible encounter God, or even angels for that matter, they tend to, the phrase is fall down on their face. Now, an angel will say, "Don't worship me, don't do that," but God receives that worship, it's proper. So the proper response to being in front of God is holy fear, which causes you to fall down. Now, these guys are falling on their backsides. A little bit different. Makes me wonder, though. I know Scripture says when Jesus returns, every knee will bow, every tongue confess that he is Lord. But it makes me wonder if the non-believers will fall backwards like these guys, and the believers will fall forwards in prayer and worship. It's an interesting thought. And so I bring up this statement because it shows, again, the power that Jesus has, and that he is the I am. He is God. And in all these other statements, he is our life giver, he is our protector, he is our guide, our shepherd, our light. And it is he who, in a few weeks from now, we will talk about his crucifixion, his death. It won't end there. The next week we'll talk about his resurrection. And again, that sermon will be a bit more defending the resurrection, how we can know he actually rose from the dead. Kind of a sneak peek into that group I want to start on the third Sundays of each month. With that, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Lord, I thank you. Thank you for taking the time and the effort to show us who you are, to have these things written down for the sake of those who weren't there to actually witness them. Thank you for loving us enough to guide us, to give us life, and ultimately to die for us. Thank you for calling us back to you, even though, as Paul wrote, we were enemies of you. I pray, Lord, that you will remind us as we go on just who you are, and bring to mind one of these I am statements, whichever one's appropriate for the situation, the occasion. Lord, now please be with us as we get ready to part ways and head home. Keep us safe on the roads. And again, help us to see those who you want us to talk to. Maybe one of them needs to know that you're the bread of life, or that you are the resurrection, or that you are their shepherd, their good shepherd, who goes and finds that one to bring it back to the flock of 99. Thank you, Lord, for everything. It's in your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.